Your ever-present calm in the storm. Link FM, linking people to Jesus.
Craig Bailie, good afternoon. Welcome back. Craig has been on a mission to educate people on the importance of voting through his BLC, Bailie Leadership Consultancy Voter Drive that he's been on for the last couple of months. So he's going to be sharing with us exactly what transpired during the voter drive. He's had a couple of meetings in and around the city as well with different stakeholders, and we're going to find out more about how those meetings went as well. Craig, good afternoon. Welcome back. Always a pleasure having you. How are you doing?
Hi, Mr. K. Yeah, good to be here. Thank you for your very kind introduction. I'm not convinced that I'm deserving of the title leadership expert, but it's definitely something I'm working on.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm good. I think, feeling the effects of pushing hard, if I may use a more colloquial term, hustling.
Yeah.
Before the elections on 29 May. Yeah, just pushing hard, hustling to try and get as many people as possible to increase their awareness, encourage their involvement, encourage their thinking before they get involved, hopefully, on the 29th of May.
Yeah.
Just to get people to consider the difficult questions and the possible answers to those questions.
All right. For those who may not be up to speed with the conversations that we've been having weeks prior or even months prior now, Bailie Leadership Consultancy, why do you exist?
Well, I think there's a lot of firstly a lot of people, and by implication a lot of materials out globally, and for a long period of time about leadership. So certainly a lot of people and organizations involved with analyzing leadership, developing leadership, teaching about leadership. And yet, when we look at the state of the world today, something is clearly missing. I think a lot of the work that is being done, a lot of it is good work, clearly not always hitting the mark. So I guess I'm one of many actors trying to fill a gap, and I hope that through the consultancy I'm able to bring something unique, something different to what others bring to the table as far as leadership goes. Certainly our country is a prime example of a space desperately in need of yearning for better leadership.
Yeah.
And I think with that there's a need for South Africans. It's a journey I'm still on. There's a need for South Africans to learn exactly what good leadership looks like, what it means in theory and in practice. And over these last several months, we've been especially focused on the upcoming elections, trying to raise awareness around the connection between the 29th of May, when we have this wonderful privilege of electing our political leaders, getting people to understand the connection between that and our daily lives. John Maxwell says everything rises and falls on leadership.
Yeah.
I think history teaches us that. The present day teaches us this. And so, I'm of the firm belief that we are duty bound as citizens, certainly as Christians, to take that opportunity on the 29th of May and to exercise our right to vote and to vote accordingly. By that I mean for leaders and for policies that we believe will take the country towards a brighter future.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the voter drive. It's all about May the 29th. You've had a couple of engagements with some key stakeholders and with the general public as well. Please take us through your experience with the voter drive, and let us know what the feedback was like from the community.
Well, it's something we've spoken about during a previous interview. I think the response, I'd like to have had a better response to the voter drive, but to be honest, as I shared earlier on before the interview, it's something I've done before in the Western Cape prior to the 2019 elections, and the response then wasn't much better. But in a sense, this isn't really why I'm setting out to do this sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think it's important for anyone who believes in a cause to do the best that he or she can, irrespective of what the response might be. So certainly a lot of communication has gone out. I'm thankful to not just Link FM, but also other radio stations that have had me on air to discuss the upcoming elections and the importance of South African citizens, but also Christians, getting involved, thinking about the important issues of our day and how they relate to our political leaders.
And with the engagements that you've had so far, you did mention that the response hasn't been as positive as what you would have liked. But what did you manage to draw out of those engagements? What's the general feeling among the people of East London who were present at the engagements that you had around elections?
Yeah, so we hosted a public speaking engagement on the 27th of April. That was a Saturday morning at New Life Church in Beacon Bay. And despite the relatively small crowd, I think there were between 30 and 35 people, I was encouraged by I sensed a hunger and a desire for information. The event, I think, was at least 30 to 60 minutes more or longer than what we'd anticipated. And that's largely because of the Q&A sessions.
Yeah.
A lot of questions coming through to the front. And I think this is really what we want as a country. But it's also something I think we want and need within the church, and something that I believe is sorely missing in many respects, especially when it comes to this issue of politics. So I was encouraged to experience, even in this relatively small group, a desire to have these discussions, a willingness to ask and think about the difficult questions. So that was very encouraging for me. And then on a couple of Sundays later, the 5th of May, very thankful to have been invited to the Ganubi Presby Church, where I again had an opportunity to share a similar message to the one I shared on Freedom Day, with a different audience, and another positive response. We didn't necessarily have a Q&A, but I could tell everyone was engaged. I saw a lot of heads nodding. A lot of, if I may say, lights turning on, bright eyes in response to what I was saying from up front.
Your ever-present calm in the storm. Link FM, linking people to Jesus. Don't lose hope. Link FM. Linking people to Jesus.
If we agree that leadership is influence and understand that who we elect to govern is highly consequential, we should view voting alongside others in free and fair elections as an act of bottom-up collective leadership for good or bad. If we understand that courageous fellowship involves the courage to assume responsibility, serve, challenge, participate in transformation, and the courage to take moral action, all concerning leadership, we should view voting in free and fair elections as an opportunity for courageous followership. Profound words coming straight out of the mouth of Mr. Bailie, seated across.
Did I say that?
This afternoon. Yeah, it sounds a bit too good. Eh? I'm kidding. But in layman's terms, what do you mean by that? Just broken down, simply.
Yeah. So, Mr. K, thanks for sharing that quote. One of the things we've been doing, we call it 30 quotes in 30 days.
Yeah.
Beginning on 29th April. Every day pushing out a quote on social media, designed to help the reader think about the importance of democracy, the significance of the opportunity we have on the 29th of May. And what I'm really trying to say there is, leadership is multidimensional. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. A significant component or reality of leadership is followership.
Yeah.
You know, if no one's following you, you can't claim to be a leader. And in a democracy, the opportunity for not just followership, but what Ira Shalev, the American author, calls courageous followership, the opportunity to express, practice, live out that kind of followership is that much bigger, because we have an opportunity to decide on election day who, in a sense, we will follow in the following 5 years during the next governance term. It may not necessarily involve following those political leaders directly, but certainly will be following the laws that they legislate, the policies that they put out. So it's an opportunity not just to hold the existing government to account as we potentially choose different leaders, but it's also a decision about who we're going to follow in the next 5 years. And also on that day, in that moment, because we're exerting collectively this influence, we're also behaving as leaders. And I think, I've often heard people talking about leadership as though it's an inherently good thing. No, we need to make that distinction between good leadership and bad leadership, between good politics and bad politics. And so, speaking specifically now to a Christian audience, it's important that we not just rock up and vote, but that we're very careful about who and what we vote for, because that's going to have an impact on the kind of leadership we'll experience in the 5 years that follow. Again, whether it's going to be good leadership or bad leadership, and how we define or distinguish between good and bad, I hope for most, if not all of the listeners, will come down to our interpretation of God's word. And for me, that's the fundamental, the foundational, the ultimate blueprint by which we understand the difference between good leadership and bad leadership, and that also applies to the political space.
Absolutely. Speaking of leadership and the political space, one British minister, Methodist minister, said this: what is morally wrong cannot be politically right. What a statement.
Powerful one.
Such a powerful statement. And I mean, it's this statement juxtaposed with what we see in politics all over the world. It's chalk and cheese. How, if even possible, do we get to a place where morality and politics go hand in hand? Is it even possible for us to get there? Because look, we're a fallen people. We live in a broken world, and people are just doing what they can with what they have. But morality has to have a place somewhere in society. Otherwise, it's anarchy, it's chaos. And that's what we're seeing in many parts of the world, and to some extent in our own country as well. How do we get there? How do we get there when we can see the link, the clear link between morality and politics?
We can see the need for the link.
The
need for the connection.
Yes.
What you're saying is we often don't see the two connecting.
No, we don't.
In the political space.
Yeah.
And I'm immediately reminded about, the Great Commission we read about in Matthew 28.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem in a country like South Africa, where 86% of the population identifies as Christian, is that we don't see politics or the political space, our political thinking and actions, as being included in that Great Commission, in that command to disciple the nations and to teach them all that Jesus commanded and how to apply those commands in the political space. And so we have this disparity, you referred to a juxtaposition between how we as a nation identify religiously and what we're seeing happening around us on a daily basis. And I speak here as a person of privilege. I say what's happening to us on a daily basis. I know there are millions of South Africans that have it way worse off than I do. In fact, I'm relatively comfortable. But I think it's important for those who live in relative comfort to recognize, understand, and work for the benefit of those who are struggling in different ways. So, in short, I think, and this is really, Mr. K, what we've been discussing over these last several interviews, is the need for the church in South Africa to be more politically engaged. But not just that, we have to engage politics from a biblical perspective, with God's word guiding us and showing the way. And so I think the more we do that as a church, the more morality and politics in South Africa will meet with one another, the more they'll connect.
Proverbs 29 and verse 2, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice, but when the wicked rule, the people mourn. And I think that's a good place to start. That's a good place it's a good way to view what's happening in this country politically. But Craig, I just want to shift things along here a little bit. I want us to go to the 29th of May. And I want you, as a political analyst, as an expert in the field, as somebody who has taught politics, as somebody who's on a mission to educate people. Because I've had people come to me at church. I've had people come to me at Hemingway's, where I don't know why they come to me. I think it's because of you and these chats that we have. And they ask me, well, what should I do? How should I vote? I've been let down so many times. I've tried this, that, and the other. I've tried this guy. I've tried Peter, Paul, and whoever. But they all seem to be falling short. And morally, there's such a disconnect. I feel like my continued vote for them is a betrayal of my conscience. How do I go about making that decision when I step into that room on May the 29th? What are the important things that need to be top of mind when I cast that ballot?
I think it's a vitally important question, and this opportunity to vote on the 29th is not something to be taken lightly. I believe, how we vote is one of the things we'll be held accountable for, not just here on earth, in political terms, but also in spiritual terms.
Yeah.
One day when we meet our Maker, I believe it's something that we'll have to account for. And so it's something we should take very seriously. As far as going about the decision is concerned, and I hear what you say about despondent people approaching you. I've also had people reaching out to me asking for advice, asking me to guide their decision making, which is perfectly fine. I mean, this is part of why we're here, right?
Yeah.
This is why Leadership Consultancy exists, is to guide people, to help people navigate the spaces they're living in an increasingly disruptive, uncertain, and troubled world. And I think South Africa is currently living in a troubled moment. I think it's important that we as voters, Christian voters also, remain grounded in the reality that our choice is always going to be between different, if I may use this very strong word, different evils. In other words, every political party is a flawed actor or entity because of our inherently sinful nature.
Yeah.
So we need to make peace with that. I think remembering that will keep us grounded. And following on from that, even if our political party, whichever party that may be, ends up winning the elections, I'm not convinced that anyone other than the ANC or the ruling party will win. I mean, speaking in terms of numbers. But even if one's party does end up winning the elections, it's important for us to recognize that, I've always said democracy is a team sport. Everyone needs to be engaged in the game. And as soon as one player drops the ball, the whole team is penalized or the whole team suffers. So it's important that everyone plays their part. And so we can't rely on government, on whoever the ruling party may be, to do all the work of governance. And I'm using the term governance there very broadly. Obviously, government has a responsibility to fulfill. But, we're talking again now about leaders, the leader-follower relationship. Citizens also have a responsibility, and they have that much more responsibility and freedom in a democracy to hold that government to account. And to engage in the provision of services, for example, that ideally shouldn't be provided by the state. And so part of the challenge, I think, we need to overcome as a church in South Africa is to move out of the culture that over a long period of time we've developed. And part of that culture is seeing the state as the provider of all, or the provider of everything that we need. And it shouldn't be that way. Now, I'm certainly not arguing for any government in South Africa to pull the welfare rug out from under our population. I think that would be a catastrophe. But I think we need to reorient ourselves so that we're moving in a direction where increasingly citizens are less dependent on the state, have a greater awareness of their potential, and are in a space where they can exercise that potential alongside fellow South Africans who are willing to help them and who are willing to guide them and steer them in an appropriate direction. So more and more people will become self-reliant and less reliant on the state. I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there, but like I said, I think it's important we recognize, firstly, these are flawed organizations. We cannot rely on any political party to respond to all of our needs and desires. I think we're bordering on idolatry if we aren't already there, when we find ourselves in that space. Now, we can understand non-Christians thinking this way. There's work to be done there. We need to share the gospel. We need to disciple. But I think it's more problematic when Christians are thinking this way. But the challenge is, how are we going to shift this thinking if we're not having this conversations about politics in our local churches? We need to make time for these conversations. We need to equip ourselves for these conversations, because I think they can go horribly wrong if the right people aren't leading them and facilitating them. So there's a need there for training, but there's also a need for courage to have those conversations in the first place.
Don't lose hope. Link FM, linking people to Jesus. Link FM, your daily dose of sanity.
Craig, we're wrapping up this discussion. Craig, I'm going to allow you to have the final word in this conversation. What is your message to everybody tuned into this broadcast?
Thanks, Mr. K. So your last question revolved around how we as Christians go about deciding who and what to vote for on the 29th of May. I always talk about the who and the what, right? Yep. The who are the names, who are the faces. We're concerned about who the leaders are. What character traits do they possess? What are their competencies? Do they have the experience? Do they have the qualifications that we believe are required for service in Parliament? We haven't had that discussion yet, right? What are those qualifications? What kind of experience are we looking for? But these are the kinds of conversations that I yearn to see local churches having. It doesn't have to be on the Sunday service. at any time during the week. It's just to gather and to talk about these very important issues. So there's the who, but then also the what. When we're talking about the what, we're talking about what the existing campaigning parties are putting forward as their policy manifestos. Let's call these the promises they're making to the public about the kind of policies they're going to enforce or execute or govern according to should they come into power. And it's vitally important that we study and consider what these policy manifestos are. I shared a link with a friend several days ago, and the response on WhatsApp was, my God, because of the number of manifestos that one finds at this link. So, Christians need to think about maybe perhaps using a process of elimination. What is most important to me as a Christian that I can use to draw or pull between 5, 10, maybe 5 or even fewer parties out of this list that I can go and study and make my decision. But those policies are vitally important, and my conviction, this is at least how I approach it, is to look for the policies that most closely align with God's word. And so when we go out and vote on the 29th of May, we may approach this opportunity in different ways. We might be motivated in different ways. Either we could vote out of fear, which I think one could also call strategic voting, where one thinks, well, which party stands to have, or which party has the greatest potential to knock the incumbent government or the ruling party off of its perch, if I may use those terms. For me, and again, this is my personal conviction, I risk stepping on some toes here, but I think this is inevitable when we have these conversations.
Go ahead.
My conviction is that whatever I do in life, I don't always get this right. I'm a fallen being. But whatever I do, including my political action and who I vote for, I must ask myself, what decision, what action best honors God? As Christians, we're told to seek first the kingdom, and all these things shall be added unto you. And so I have a policy issue in mind, for example, that I'm not going to talk about now, that for me is primary in making the decision about who I vote for. And so if I see a policy manifesto that immediately doesn't align with my conviction on this policy issue, then I'm going to set that party aside as an option, and I'm going to consider other parties. And so I use a process of elimination there. Once that policy issue is ticked, I'm then willing to consider that party as an option, and I'll compare the policy issues in its manifesto with those in other manifestos. But I'm not going to compare 2 or 3 parties that haven't ticked that issue that is primary in my mind when it comes to voting. So like I said, we either go out and vote out of fear or strategically, or we vote according to biblical principles and values. And for me, it's the latter, I think, that best honors God. Now, I'm open to correction. I'm happy to have a conversation about this with people, and that's precisely what I've been trying to do these last several weeks. Very happy to have engaged with people on the 27th of April and again on the 5th of May. But to be honest, as thankful as I am for those opportunities, they aren't nearly enough. And this is something we have to continue even after the 29th of May. Our Christian political engagement cannot end on election day. It has to continue right up until the day we die. I've said in a previous interview, God is a political being. We were created in His image. We are therefore political beings. It's not something we can run away from. Either we do politics, and even if we don't, politics will do us. So we need to think about that.
Link FM, your daily dose of sanity.